You're listening to Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. This week's podcast is proudly brought to you by Bendix. Put your foot down with confidence. I'm your host, Jason Owen. Today we're joined by Andrew French, who is the Manager of Product Engineering at Bendix. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Great. Thanks very much, Jason, and look forward to talking with you today.
Mate, it's been a busy week so far. Have you been a busy boy?
Always something to do here. We've just released a new product range,
wow.
the Ultimate Plus. So we've been very busy over the last few months getting that ready and getting that product out to market.
Well, hey, thanks for taking some time to have a chat to us today. And we're going to be talking about the past, present and future of brake pads. And we're going to jump straight in and start this one away with asking you, what was the need for brake pads in that very first instance?
I took that question. It's a good question. And looking at the vehicles back, Bendix started in 1955. So It was formed out of a UK entrepreneur or friction company called Mintex.
Okay.
Started a business in Ballarat in Victoria. And it initially serviced the market here because obviously Australia being part of the Commonwealth, so the English came here and thought we needed some more friction material for our vehicles.
Right, okay.
And that's where it started from. So,
well, it's kind of an interesting start for brake pads because obviously, you know, we worked out how to go fast as the human race and then we had to know how to stop for the corners, I guess.
Exactly right.
How did Bendix first get involved with pads?
Well, it was initially through the OEM channels. So with local content requirements. So as you may recall back in the day, back in the 40s, GM was here with the Holden being released, and that was the first, I guess, locally produced car. And through that, that's where Bendix was a partner.
And their reputation started from there. And they went across to the other manufacturers as well, didn't they?
That's right. So Ford also and Chrysler.
Yeah, the big three.
And additionally, big three. And that was probably set Bendix up for the local manufacturer for a long while here, at least through until the 70s.
Now, you did talk about, you know, things kicking off in 1955, but the actual Bendix name, what was the actual meaning behind that one?
So it's interesting. You need to do a bit of research. The Bendix Corporation of the USA was a partner. So initially the business started out as Mintex and then partnered with Bendix Corporation in the US, which is then Bendix Mintex. So then the brand was developed through there. So Bendix had the technology for the disc brake pads, and that was well entrenched in the US auto industry.
Right.
And that was through GM. So obviously GM being a manufacturer in Australia as well, they leaned towards Bendix for the friction material.
Well, the reputation sounded like it was well established, so it's good to keep that brand going for obviously the familiarisation. What did the first Bendix brake pads look like? The very first ones. What were they like?
The first ones, pads were very simple. They were just a OE design. It was, I think, on the early Holden, the old HR Holden, for those who are
the disc brake front end Holden. Yeah.
That's it, the very first one.
Yes.
I think HD was drum and HR was disc, and we made pads for those ones. So they were they're just a rectangular shaped pad with guide pins. We still sell them today, and they're still used in modern cars, that design to the day. So materials were simple, though, compared to today.
And did what they had to do from a local standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I said local content, I think, as well. Way back when manufacturers were looking to use as much local content as possible.
Well, it was a new technology, wasn't it? I mean, brake pads and disc brakes were kind of a luxury item. Everything was drum brakes prior to that. So it was real cutting-edge stuff.
Absolutely. Well, going from drum to disc, as you well know, if you've ever driven a drum brake vehicle, you suffer from poor performance when they're cold, and sometimes they pull to the left for no good reason, and if you get them wet, they don't work at all very well. So disc brakes are a great upgrade, and that's what Bendix US, I guess that's where they established themselves quite well in that market there.
Absolutely.
And we could leverage off that as well.
Well, let's talk about evolution and milestones and so forth. And brake pads over the years have gone through a number of different changes to what we know today. What were some of the milestones that brake pads have gone through?
So from at Bendix's point of view, we started in the 60s with our first disc pad. We'll call it that. We had a few drum linings before that, and then the evolution in 10-year lots, the disc pads were the same. Through to the 70s, we were doing OEM, and we upgraded manufacturing in our processes here in Ballarat and started evolving more into the aftermarket and offering a variety of different formulations for different driving styles. And that continued right through to the 80s. And in the 80s, we still had OEM. We were number one OEM supplier for Ford and Holden. Then in the 90s, there was a bigger focus on R&D. So a lot of our technology initially was through our licensors or our shareholders. But in the late 90s, it was deemed that we need to do more in-house. So we had a little bit of in-house here through that period, but in the 90s, we heavily invested in R&D, and probably that's where I came from. I joined here in the late 90s, 99.
Okay. Yeah.
And involving a noise and vibration measurement machine, upgrading dynamometers and the like, and also upgrading the formulations. And that offering then grew out into your heavy duties and your niche market segments.
Right, okay. Heading
then
into
in 2000,
go ahead. 2000s is where it really started to change, didn't it?
Absolutely, and we have regulatory changes in 2000, and then in 2005, the company Bendix Mintix changed its name to FMP Group, Friction Materials Pacific. So same name, still under the Bendix brand. So colloquially still known as Bendix around everywhere. So
okay,
not many people see it FMP Group. So that's what it stands for. And then of course we got into then the higher end formulations, a lot of development in house here at Ballarat with I'll say NAO technology, non-asbestos organic, also semi-metallic. They're our core materials and a few European ones.
And then of course you had this introduction of the Bendix blue titanium stripe. That was game changing. When I saw that came out, I even had a look at that as an ex-mechanic and thought, hang on a second, saving the bedding in time. This is brilliant.
Yes, and that's one of the innovations. Great question and comment. The blue titanium stripe is the one that really saved mechanics time, and it also gave a benefit to the end user. You put your foot on the brake, no bedding in, and you get that great pedal feel right out of the box.
Yeah, that's stunning. That's exciting. We live in exciting times, and technology is our friend. And when it comes to brakes, never more so. Tell us about the hybrid stuff that you guys are doing there, the hybrid fusion.
Well, part of that, I didn't mention the stealth pad. So a lot of people, when you look at those, they do look like there's cutouts in the pad. So I did mention before we invested in the noise and vibration machinery and test equipment. So that's part of putting that technology, the titanium stripe and a few of those materials to give let's say a more pleasant experience to the customer, because you might go back 20 or 30 years, noise wasn't such a big issue, but these days, any squeak in a car, as you well know, people are talking about it. Yeah. And I'm sure there's plenty of mechanics out there who still experience squeaks in cars, and it's another podcast talking about vehicle noise.
And as vehicle design changed in 2000 quite considerably with airflow and so forth, the inside cabin of a car became a lot quieter, and the focus on road noise, insulation, and anything, even tyre design, went through huge changes. And from a braking point of view, you guys rose to the challenge.
And that was most of it. And additionally, with those materials, looking at how we can improve that user experience. And as you said, customers and vehicles have become more sophisticated, and we invest heavily in test quite a lot. When I say quite a lot, we've got development programs we always are running, and it's mostly about the user experience, not exactly how they look, but how they feel in the car. And you can only do that through local development and having the vehicles on the road as well as dyno testing.
Absolutely. Well, let's have a look at brake pads today. And, we go back from a long time ago and how they were producing the materials that were used back then to the materials that we have today. Talk us through some of those changes that we've seen to get us to this point now regarding material.
Well, early materials, they were medium friction level. They didn't last long at high temperature or loads. So comfort factors such as noise and vibration weren't high on a consideration, probably, and as we talked about, until the 90s. So those early materials, people looked at them still do through rose-coloured glasses and say, the discs never wore out and they're always shiny. they only had about 8 to 10 different ingredients in them.
Okay.
And whereas today it's anything from 13 to 15.
Wow. Yeah.
And we'd say that, and it's just like anything. There's more and more regulation around materials. They're more
Yes.
complex because people are looking for stability
Yes.
in friction levels. So that means anywhere from 0 degrees right up to 300 degrees, we really want a constant brake pedal.
The demand and so forth is quite hard to get bang on, and the amount of vehicles we have in the car park at the moment, all screaming for quality Bendix products. You know, you guys are offering a lot of products at the moment, aren't you?
We do, and we develop those segments based on the needs and the growing diversity. That's been one of our challenges over the years,
Right.
and certainly look at those segments. For example, four-wheel drive, we'll talk about. It's very popular these days. So
Yeah,
that
it's
covers anything
huge.
from it's going nuts. It's probably the best way to describe
And
it, isn't it?
the brakes
Anything
spend
from
half the time underwater as well. That just amazes me, you know.
well, they're some of the challenges, aren't they? So, yeah, people use them for very different things. So you get your what you might say in Victoria, Toorak tractor here that
Yeah,
full four-wheel drive that we want all of the comforts of no noise and pleasant driving everywhere, to the guy that's out in the bush pushing them through rivers and up mountains and through mud and the rest of it. So it covers anything from a RAV4, say, through to a Land Cruiser.
yeah,
And the materials are quite different, though. So when you think of those two different vehicles, different weights and different requirements then from the braking. So within each Bendix product range, we have different formulations depending on the vehicle type. So it's not one four-wheel drive box has got one formula. It could have up to several different ones in it depending on the vehicle type. So that's part of our role here in conjunction with product management, is making sure we've got the right product on the right vehicle.
Well, just going back a quick second, we talked about the full drives going through the water and so forth, and a full drive, a specific off-road full drive, has actually got 3 and 4 different environments to encounter: road, water,
right.
mud, and sand.
Yes.
And we take it for granted that we see the vehicle going through, but what we don't really consider is the products that are currently submerged below those surfaces. But when you think about it, there's another side to this as well. We've seen the rise of flooding in urban areas, and quite often or not, we'll see conventional passenger vehicles driving through and wading through waist-deep water. It leads me to my next question. The kind of testing you would have to do on your brake pads in the different environments, that must be just a massive challenge for you to overcome.
It is. And R&D is one of those activities that it's how long is a piece of string. So another part of it is we can't just keep testing infinitum. So we've got very strict, I guess, procedures that we use, and we know based on experience what methods will cover that broad range. So to your point about all of those different driving conditions, wet testing. So we do a wet brake test where we dunk the brake in water and see what the friction looks like. Obviously, it's a lot less than it is when it's dry, but sometimes people don't drive to those conditions, but they do pretty well. And
I have a vision of the hot pan going into the sink after cooking some chips, and the steam coming off, and it's like, yep, that works.
And they're worrying about the rotors not being quite right, or some pulsation through the steering wheel afterwards.
Oh, goodness me. Well, let's jump forward now. Let's go forward 20 years, and we're going to have a look at what brake pads look like and how they will affect, say, the end users at workshops. Where are we going to be?
Well, we see friction, I still see it as a relevant component in the future. So I guess I'm thinking in 2040 that we might have a few more electric vehicles or hybrids, given the changing environment. It's a bit hard to predict these days. But certainly vehicles will have friction. It'll still be required, but I'm sure that there will be less dust, less noise, because if you've got a vehicle that's electric or hybrid, there's less cabin noise naturally.
Yeah.
And very low rotor wear with corrosion cleanability. So if you're not using the brake that often, it needs to be able to clean the disc up without being noisy. And of course, emissions are one of those also new targets that we're looking at, and everybody's worried about dust in the environment. So,
well, the next question is an interesting one, because I had quite a good debate with a discussion with a gentleman a while ago about the regen charging in braking systems and so forth, and the discussion centered around the fact that if you're in an emergency situation, the car's not going to go, well, hey, hang on a second, I just want to capture this energy. You've got to stop. So
No, that's right.
I guess it's a statement / question. Will we see the braking systems in the future become effective to the point where they're almost like race car style? They will work with the slightest touch. You know, if you have to use them in emergency situations, they will stop the car.
Absolutely. And I would also probably throw into that discussion that if you've got the electrification of vehicle and the regen and you've got autonomous driving, that the brake will be ready. So
Almost poised.
we've got
It's
that
almost
delay at the moment.
It's almost like active, like activate brakes. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And if you've ever driven a car with the predictive or the cruise control where it'll apply the brake for you and the like, you can actually hear the ABS working in the background before you actually get the feeling of the brake stopping. So I think there'll be a lot more. The delay times that we're seeing at the moment will be reduced, which will reduce accidents.
Of course. Well, before we get 20 years down the track, what sort of evolution do you think we're going to see in the short term?
Further evolution will be weight loss.
Yeah.
Again, material will be different. I'm getting to the US where they've introduced banning copper at the moment for environmental reasons.
Okay.
So brake pads over in the US as of 2023, you can't have any copper in them.
Okay.
So there's a lot of work going on in the background around that. And I'm sure that will flow into other countries over time. So we'll see a bit more regulation in that regard.
Okay.
And vehicles are getting heavier. So
yes,
SUVs, people want to off-road capability, on-road comfort. Think of, let's say, a HQ Holden and a VF Commodore. I'm a Holden sort of guy, I guess. They're about a ton different. And then you put an SUV and they're up to 3 ton. So you're talking a lot of weight that you've got to deal with there, and regen's not going to do it. So you're going to need friction, but perhaps the pads will be a different size, but they'll still be there.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly
always plenty of work
times.
to do.
It's very challenging times. From a workshop point of view, will they become non-serviceable?
I'm guessing not likely. It was interesting. I was on a webinar the other day with AAA talking about integration of electronics in vehicles.
Yes.
They are becoming a lot more complex, as we all know, and you can't do anything these days without a specific a tool like a scan tool or the like to help you change the pad, and that's happening right now. So I think in the future that they're going to be certainly a service item, but they will be more difficult to service. So if you don't have the factory tool to reset the park brake, for example, then you won't be able to change it.
It sounds like the brakes, which, pardon the pun, sat on the outer in a vehicle, is becoming more integrated into the electronic systems. And, I have this vision of being able to hop in the car and go, right, check the fuel, check the oil, check the brakes, and you'll be able to get an idea of your percentage of where you're at. It's an exciting time. I've said it a couple of times during this series. It's exciting to be in the automotive industry right now. DIY, you mentioned on the using the scan tools and so forth, and we see a number of scan tools becoming aftermarket accessories now. Do you think we'll arrive at a point where DIY won't be available for some of these vehicles?
I think it'll be more difficult. Certainly, if you need to outlay for specific tools like that, it becomes less attractive.
Yeah.
As a DIYer, unless somebody comes up with a great idea that you might have a little business that goes and hires out scan tools at your local brake pad retailer, for example. So as you say, exciting times, but different times. And
of course.
I see that it'll evolve. The need will be there and it'll certainly evolve and move forward.
Well, as we start to head to the end of this podcast, let's hit you up with a question, quite a challenging question. So I've been looking forward to your answer on this one. What's one of the facts that we don't know about Bendix? What's something that really, changes the game for us in your knowledge of your brand?
It's a good question.
Blow us out of the water. Blow us out of the water. Give us something really crazy.
Well, Bendix is an Australian-based business, and probably a fact that not everybody realises. We manufacture in Ballarat, and it's around 1 million pad sets per year.
How many? 1 million?
1 million, yes. That includes some exports, so not all of it's used domestically. We service Southeast Asia, and of course, Ballarat we're a major employer in the region, and all design and testing is conducted in Australia
sets
through
per
product
year.
engineering.
And has that been increasing? Is the demand increasing?
It's relatively stable at the
Yes.
moment. So if you look at our new car sales are relatively stable, and the car park's kind of at an equilibrium in Australia,
Yes.
as opposed to, say, somewhere like in Southeast Asia. We service those markets where there's a growing, new car sales are growing, and older cars are still staying on the road. Whereas here, we get a one-for-one basically changeover. We get a new car, and then an old one comes off the road.
Right.
So it's relatively stable.
But even from an export side of things, that's a massive Australian success story, and you guys ought to be commended for that. I didn't even know that. That's amazing.
And it's one of those, it's like anything you don't know. And manufacturing in Australia, we see a lot of it around in the media. But look, there's small pockets of it, and I'll say green shoots. And we're looking forward to some more of that. I see that there's a company starting up in New South Wales looking at doing EVs and the like.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, look, thanks very much for coming on the show, Andrew. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. And if any of our listeners have any follow-up questions about anything we've discussed today, they can go ahead and reach out to Bendix via Mechanic.com.au community. If you're not already a member of Mechanic.com.au, join the thousands of other mechanics around Australia who are earning, learning and networking more at Mechanic.com.au, the home of Australia's mechanics, by creating a free account today. Thanks for tuning into the Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. If you want to unlock a whole host of trade-only resources, including our private community, competitions, educational content, job opportunities, training, troubleshooting and much, much more, go ahead and create a free account now at Mechanic.com.au. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Mechanic.com.au podcast soon.